Welcome to Slop Happens. Today we're going to discuss elections. And one of the reasons is actually because I got elected to our local city council in the Netherlands in Krimpen aan de IJssel. And discussing this, I think I also brought Claudio to do something very interesting. So
I'm not going to say anything about it too early. It's a little bit jinxed, but there's definitely a push here in the States to get more people who are qualified to run for local office. So I'll just leave it at that for now. But that's no small flex getting elected, Bianca. So congratulations, counselor.
Thank you. Yeah, it's interesting, and it's an interesting process. I mean, you have, it's not just about the election, it's also about people trusting you.
Right.
And one thing which really stood by me was actually that somebody came up to me and she was like, I'm going to watch you. And it didn't feel weird or obnoxious, but what she really meant was, I am going to watch that you are going to look into our local interest. And that's her, from her perspective, it's an important thing because it is about our town. And
Right.
it's not about what's happening on a global level, which we often discuss out here. So I think that is what makes the big difference being elected to a local city council. Because you look at the small things, you look at the playgrounds, you look at welfare support, you look at traffic jams and stuff like that,
Right.
which happen in our town, not the ones outside. And all those small, tiny things which have a huge impact on your life. Because, for example, simple thing, discussion out here still, currently our supermarkets are open on a Sunday from
Right.
12 till 5 or 6. And but there's more shops that want to open. But they're not allowed because we have a very strong Christian appearance in local politics, meaning they don't want the shops to open on Sunday because it's a resting day. And those are the things I'm going to talk about in city council in the coming years. Of course, accessibility will be one of my crucial topics,
Right.
next to sustainability, but all really focused on making impact on a local level. So there'll be an interesting one. And I think it's also a good one to think about. I mean, we see a huge discussion coming up on elections this last few years. You have been there in the US.
Oh, yeah.
But even in Europe, we see some differences with recently the Hungarian people choosing finally somebody different than Viktor Orban.
And let me just interject. And Viktor Orban deserves props because he actually recognized that he lost the election.
Exactly.
I wish we could say the same, but yes.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because his opponent and new president Peter Major, he had everything against him, and that gives something interesting for you guys to look forward to. If you think about all the impact which is currently happening in the US, that even if you don't owe the government TV stations like what's happened in Hungary in the last 16 years, you can still win elections with a good story and getting the trust of the people. And for getting the trust, it is about you and being honest and being open. And I think that's one of the important things that's being showed by the winning of the winning of Peter Major in Hungary.
That essentially somebody had run out all of their trust and kind of pushed it as far as they could, and the people are just like, fine, we're ready to move on, dude. We could certainly hope for that here in the States too. I think where we are now with the whole trust thing is that really we have folks, entrepreneurs that have really made careers out of sowing mistrust and sowing mistrust in perfectly legitimately fine institutions that were functional and sowing so much distrust that you were starting to create this environment of let's just burn everything down. Let's just get rid of every institution. You know, the government in DC is a deep state. It needs to be torn down. It needs to be gotten rid of. Oh, but by the way, you can't trust elections. And if we have an election, you know it's going to be manipulated. You know it's going to be rigged. And of course, if the election doesn't go your way, you complain that it was rigged. When one of your candidates gets elected, of course, there's no issue with the election. So we're having right now where we're going through all this sort of clamping down on elections based on these sort of false myths, like that there are all these immigrants that are coming to the United States and voting one way, and they're being paid to vote, and that the elections are being manipulated with dead or fake voters, which in a country of 300 million happens, but certainly not even enough to move one single local municipal election. So the scale of fraud that is happening is so unbelievably exaggerated that it's being used as a mechanism to sow doubt, which then is opening up now the possibility to take these elections and take local election bureaus and try to nationalize them so you can have the federal government exerting pressure on these local election bureaus. So that's kind of what we're in the middle of in the United States. There's this SAVE Act that's before Congress right now, which is to really tighten up and make it more difficult to vote in the United States. But again, this is all part of a push to try to exclude voters, to try to make it more difficult for people who are either less stable or moving around or whatever to vote, and also to allow the federal government certain mechanisms that they can use to try to manipulate the elections in the future.
Yeah, but I think that's one of the big differences between us in Europe and between you guys in the US. I mean, there's a lot of data which is known about the voters. And with the data, I mean, I don't mean about what kind of preference you have on the internet because you allow every cookie to track you, so every data can be collected. But I'm really talking about the data of voters. I mean, in the Netherlands, for example, and that counts for European countries, you can vote because you have the right to vote. And that is because you're a citizen, you have a passport, and you can vote. You don't need to be a member of a political party. You don't need to register as a voter and all these things. And I think that's already a huge difference. I mean,
so just
let's start there.
Just to clarify, in the United States, you need to register as a voter, but you don't need to register with a party. So the party affiliation is just an extra box that you can check off when you register yourself as a voter. But every time you move from one district to another, you're expected to be able to update your voter registration information. So there's a little bit of friction and challenge to that. But the party affiliation, a lot of people like putting themselves as independent. A lot of people like not disclosing. The downside of that is that you don't get to choose the candidate for the party. So if you favor the Democratic Party and you want to be able to choose who your candidates are to be able to vote on, you would need to participate in a primary election. And that primary is only open to people who are officially registered as Democrats. So if you really want to participate in the process, you do need to have your voter information. But in 46...
That's already, I think, a big difference, because for us, and then I'm talking about the Netherlands because that's the situation I know best. I'm a member of the Progressive Party, which used to have a different name till short. But the Progressive, as a member of the Progressive Party, I can vote for the list of candidates. I can vote who needs to be our leader. But that is specifically within our political party. And it's closed system, so I don't need to register anywhere.
Right.
The only thing is I need to pay for my membership. And that's the only thing which is traceable, technically, is that I'm a member of this party. And with us, it means you have to be a member to be able to elect the candidates or to be elected as a candidate for the political party.
So those are two fairly crucial pieces of information. that are out there. So it is membership in a party and where you've made any sort of political donations. And in the United States, that information is public in some regards. Like political donations are definitely publicized. Party affiliation.
Even the small ones?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Like classic scenario that you'll see here in the States is there's some sort of mass shooting. We don't know anything about the assassin, but the first piece of information that the reporters can surface is, oh yeah, 10 years ago they gave $40 to this Democratic cause, so therefore they're a lefty. And then, the media starts going one way or another. So that is probably one of the most easily available pieces of information on somebody who's a stranger.
That's scary. It means that even a youth sin, let's say it like that. So because one time you donated to a green cause,
right,
or to the Green Party, it can trace back to you forever.
Oh,
and that's
yeah,
something different, because again, a big difference, because in our case, €1,000,
right,
that is as you go higher than 1,000 or above, then it needs to be a public donation. If it's not, it's your donation. Nobody can push you.
That's an interesting point. So it shouldn't be like every single donation every time you give $10 at the grocery stores, because on the other hand, it would make me worry about what petitions do I sign at the supermarket, what causes I give $25 to, It makes you feel like, okay, if this is going to be used to construct some sort of profile about me in the future, it would make me a little bit reluctant to make donations, or I would try to see if there's any way I could do non-political donations or donations that can remain anonymous. But this is hard information that's being used to create a profile on people. If I were to apply to a position in the federal government, it's illegal for the government to use that in considering me for a particular position. But yet this is happening all the time, in terms of, for appointees or people, being considered for certain sort of like, I don't know if at the cabinet level, but certainly I would say like smaller state and local government, or lower functions of the federal government.
Yeah, and if the government doesn't do it, it's going to be journalists that make the profile, which makes it informed, and then it influences political opinion. And I think that is one of the key risks, which you catch me on with saying, hey, think about what you sign up for.
Right.
Because I happen to sign petitions. Not always, but some of them really the valuable ones. Recently, I signed one for having more attention to job opportunities in less hours than 32 hours, because a lot of people with disabilities want to work, but they work somewhere between 16 and 24 hours a week, meaning that those are things which are important to me. And technically, they're also related to my political opinion, so they don't matter. But what if I, for example, would shift to a total different party that says, hey, you have to work 32 hours a week at least, because everybody needs to participate in the job market and contribute to the economy. And then they find out 20 years ago, I signed a petition. And I think that's often also one thing that a lot of people don't realize. Even if you do not have a current political path in your head, but it can happen over time, that if you do something now, data is stored, and that the data can get back to you in a later stage in life. So either do we not sign any petitions anymore, or sign them in a closed version.
It's a sign of the times. I mean, we're just so desperate to categorize people. There's this scene in the movie Civil War, where they come up to this man who's got a gun, and they're like, don't shoot us, we're Americans. And he asks them, well, what kind of Americans are you? And we're so desperate to know, what kind of Americans are you? Which side do you stand on? And because we've gotten so used to looking at things through such a polarized lens. So I'm hoping, that at the local level, where we're talking about issues like traffic, we're talking about stuff, like development. We're talking about picking up the garbage and stuff. Like, hopefully there are pockets of governance or pockets of leadership that just aren't so hyper polarized. Oh my God.
I want to move on the data part.
Okay,
because you brought in a example which was the if I pronounce it wrong,
Tascón?
The Tascón case. Yes, exactly. My Spanish is really bad.
So if you missed our last episode, we got into detail on this one list, this one petition, to see if Chavez was going to be elected or not, and then the folks that signed that petition got put into a national database, and that national database basically turned into a national blacklist. So if you had signed that Chavez should be removed from government, there should be a referendum on him. Well, guess what? You were never going to get a loan. You were never going to get a government job. You weren't going to like drive a garbage truck or a bus because they were going to look you up on the CD-ROM that listed you. So, bringing it back to that, I really feel like we are getting to that state in the United States where we're using voter registration data, or we're using donation data, or we're saying, if you're not one of us, we're either not going to give you money, and that's happening at the state level, or we're not going to hire you, or we're going to prioritize our people, when it comes to handing out resources and contracts and that sort of thing. And it's become very, very extreme.
And that is the simple thing of the idea. You think you give your data in a secure place, because that was what was intended in this case. I mean, it was about figuring out for who wanted to support the new candidate. And in the end, everybody who supported the new candidate got registered. Right. And the list got published in a later stage, meaning that people who made a decision that they want to have a new vision for the country, let's put it as easy like that, they were actually being bitten by that because they lost access to simple things like support because of their decision to support a new candidate. That's worrying. That is something that's scary shit.
It is worrying, and you get these very polarizing candidates that if you ever supported and then you could have some external issue, like for instance, the whole situation between Israel and Palestine, completely dictating whether or not you're electable or not because of how you stand on that issue. And it's like, well, wait a minute. If I'm running for a local position, you're like, okay, does my position or does my opinion on what's going on in the Middle East, how much does that matter locally?
But what I think is interesting about that is, if we talk about polarization in this case, is that actually a lot of people who were on the far right spectrum of politics,
right?
A lot of those people, they really felt that they could not be open about their political preferences. And they feared for their jobs and stuff like that. And what I find interesting is that actually what they fear for is actually happening now to people on the other side of the political spectrum, and even in the middle of the political spectrum.
Right.
Then it's going to be said, oh, you don't make a decision. And I think that is something really scary, because it tries each other more and more apart. And I find it worrying that if I'm currently watching a TV series of a Dutch reporter. She's visiting the US as a she while she is intersexual. But you're not allowed to be that anymore in the US. But what's the interesting thing that she finds out is that a lot of people made a decision to vote, in this case for Trump, because of all the things they were against with Kamala Harris. And not because they like Trump, but because the other side, according to their beliefs is so bad. And I think that is one of the big problems. If you currently look at the US, polarization is so huge. We saw that in Hungary too. Now it's moving, it's shifting, and
Right.
that's a good thing. And I think it gives hope for a lot of people. On the other side, even if this shift happens, we have to think about the people who have different beliefs than, in our case, ours. I mean, we're as democratic as they come, I think. But
Oh, you mean the Dutch?
yeah, the Dutch. Yeah, I mean, but that's the thing. And I think that is one of the important things which are often forgotten. It's not about the people on the left that need to trust elections.
Right.
It's about also the people on the far right that need to trust elections. Everybody. It doesn't matter what political color or preference you have. Everybody has to trust this. This it
Right.
means that, as in the Thyssen case, with the data being sent abroad, it means that it also makes people think on the other side, hey, I'm on the good side now, but what happens if I'm on the wrong side and things
Right.
flip? And I think that is one of the crucial things where we have to make sure that everybody's political opinion matters, because that's what makes democracy.
So this is an interesting phenomenon that I've seen happen over the last couple of years here in the United States, where essentially there's been a power grab in general, towards the right. And the whole thinking is like, well, if you had these same powers, would you be able to stomach a Democratic administration or Democratic governor having the same powers that you've assigned to yourself? And the answer 9 times out of 10 is no. It's unacceptable. So you're basically, essentially, you're giving yourself powers as if there is no future horizon beyond the very short term, like as if like you're going to be in power forever, or you're committing illegal acts that are like against the Constitution or against statutes or against basically how Congress has decided to spend its budget, and working in violation of that. But you're acting as if you're never going to be held accountable for this. And that's what I find particularly troubling. Like, is there something they know that I don't know here?
No, but I think that is one of the things that's changing. And I think it's good to have discussions like these. And it's not that we have the discussion because we have sort of alike views on politics, but I think it's a discussion we need to have more often. And it's about trusting the system, because we also see, and that's what we saw it in Hungary, you see it in the US, and it's happening all over the world. So it's not just somewhere, is that democracy also is very fragile.
Yes.
Because if you take a few pillars away, then democracy is able to collapse. And I don't think anybody on the left, on the right, in the middle expected this after, let's say, World War II. I mean, everybody was like, okay, in China it happens because they have the Communist Party. The same thing you had in Russia, but it's not going to happen in the West. And I think that belief,
or if it did, like I grew up, I did a junior year abroad in Germany and really studied the origins of National Socialism. Mm-hmm. And, like, how is it that something like that could come into existence? And I thought to myself, okay, my mother's from Argentina. This is in the 1980s. This is right after the military government has made asses of themselves with the Falklands War. And looking at it and going like, okay, if it's going to happen, it's going to happen in a country like Argentina, or my father who is from Chile. And you would see it happening in a Latin American country. I thought the United States was basically immune from all of this. I thought this would never happen in the US because there's too many like democratic institutions. And I think what we found is what we assumed were real safeguards and real laws were actually, a lot of them were just simply norms. Oh, well, this is how we usually do things. Well, if you have somebody who's completely unconcerned with the norms and coming in and just wants to break everything all at once, and we've got a judicial system that takes years to be able to respond to it, then yeah, we were just waiting for something like this to happen. So yeah, a good question is like, how would we come out of something like this where technology can be misused like this?
And that's a good one, because I also figure, and that's one of the interesting things I find out in recent years, is that actually technology is something which is also really distrusted when it comes to election, which brought me to dive into the whole system with paper ballots we use in Europe, and how long these are kept, and what happens to these. And I think the whole process about what happens to your vote and what happens to your personal information is one of the crucial things, because
Let's
there's
dive in.
Two things in there. When I was looking into this, it's about, okay, how long do we keep these stuff, and who is the one that decides that it can go? That's one of the things I was looking into. Secondly, what I was also looking into, how is it stored? And what happens when it's been brought away? Because a lot of the things where you see distrust starting is actually with a few of the points. And I saw them last time, for example, where you had in the US the elections with with also the paper ballots being counted. In classrooms, everybody was able to look at from outside, and still people were saying, hey, but votes were brought in and it's not fair. And the whole thing is, if you look at it, we have a very interesting example recently here in the Netherlands with one of the cities that had their city council elections. Because what happened there, one of the polling stations, a candidate came in with a group of people who had votes for other people. And that's because you can send in a vote for somebody else. And you can do, as one person, you can bring in 2 votes extra.
Oh, right.
So, for example, for your parents or your partner who's working abroad, or
your grandmother who's homesick and can't make it to the polls. Right.
Exactly. So you have a proxy vote, as it's called.
Right.
And you have 2 proxies. And one of the reasons we have 2, there's a big reason for that. There's a lot of fishermen in the Netherlands. There's also sailors in the Netherlands, meaning that in some of the families, the woman would vote for a husband or a son, or a husband and a father, or something like that, or sisters voting for. And that's the reason why we have more of these. And there's discussion on this for years already, because it feels a little bit much. Recent election, somebody came in with people, and it was a candidate for a local city council, and it used 1 polling station. In that polling station, he came in a few times after each other. I think it was 5. And every 5 times he brought new people voting, and they also had 2 proxy votes with them. So it was, I think, about 30 or 40 votes. I don't know the exact because it was not announced, but let's say it's about 50 votes in this town for this specific polling station. What happened? This got registered because it got flagged by the people sitting at the polling station and say, hey, this is weird, because they also have to report on things which are weird. So they reported that there was somebody coming in who was a member who was a candidate, and brought in people for voting with proxy votes. Based on these notes and the discussion this started, this city actually made a decision. So the old city council, the former city council, decided to do the voting all over.
Oh, wow.
So in this case, everybody voted. All the information was stored. The ballots were there. But because of the simple reason that you could not see who voted for what, or if it was a proxy vote or not, you cannot take the votes out. So the whole thing had to be done over. And that's what brought me to dive deeper in this process.
So well done. And I think it brings up one thing, that if you want to manipulate an election, you have to really go through a lot of extremes. And the fact is, if you wanted, say, to use that same sort of technique on a national election, you'd have to have thousands of people going into thousands of different polling stations and put in thousands and thousands of hours of effort into something. Of course, is going to get flagged. So decentralization and keeping everything separate basically, there's not one switch that you can flip and turn the election. There's thousands of little switches that you would have to flip to be able to try to manipulate a larger scale election. And that's the benefit. And in your case, I mean, props to you folks, props to your countrymen for being able to really make that sort of enforcement work. Unfortunately,
no, exactly. And I think one of the things is this case is actually giving a overview of a few of those safeguards. Because one is that you have a voting pass. The voting pass allows you to go into the polling station and to cast your vote. Or it allows you to send out the proxy vote to somebody else who's going to vote for you. That pass is being brought in and has been taken in by the people in the polling station after they checked your passport and if you're the correct person. There's also a list of voters which is in the polling station, and that means of all the registered voters. So they scrap these ones, and those are connected to the voting pass. So you have a voting pass, and that means that you're on the list. So they connect those two together, and then you get crossed off. These are kept separately from the ballots. So after you have that, you get your ballot. You take your ballot, you go into the booth, you sign the checkbox on who you want to vote for, and then you put it in the big trash bin.
Right.
After this process, the polling station closes at 9 in the evening, and people from the polling station are going to count the votes. So technically the passes and the lists of the voters are being packaged. That's being signed off. It's being added in the report, and then the containers gets opened, and they're going to start counting.
So the sort of technology we're using is you're filling it out, then you're coloring in these circles like you would on a standardized test, and you slide it into a scanner that then scans the results and then tabulates who's voted, and it tabulates it starts aggregating the results. So I think, I'm not sure if at night, like, any humans are actually counting votes. I think they're assembling, packaging, putting away the votes. And I would think that they would be taking the tallies off of these devices, because I know with my 60-plus-year-old fingers, like, the thought of handling pieces of paper and counting them accurately, forget it. Like, I can't do that.
Now, we actually have, it's all groups. And the fun part is it's all volunteers doing this counting. So you get selected, you get a training to do this. And the first count they do is party by party. So they're going to put in our case, in our town, we had 7 parties. This means you have 8 stacks, 7 stacks with parties, and an 8 stack, which is for 9 stacks actually. It's 8 stack number 8 is for the ones who are without coloring a ballot. And the reason for that is you can also cast your vote without choosing, because then you voted, but you didn't choose for a person. And you have the ones which are not right. So people who color 2 ballots, or people who colored outside, or even draw a complete drawing on it.
So those are rejected.
Happen. Those are rejected. So in our case, we had 9 stacks. And everybody in the polling station helps with the counting. There's 2 people watching, and there can be an occasional external person who also watches and visits. This has been done at the polling station. That's the first count. That's being published in the evening. It's being put in the computer, and it's being sent to a central stage. And in the evening, in our case, it was, I think, 10:30 or something in the evening. At 9, the polls closed. We had the outcome. The fun part was, with us, it was quite close. So the mayor said, hey, we only present percentages, no seats yet, because we're not 100% sure. where the seats go, because we have an opportunity that some shift because of the closeness of percentages and votes got. And also because you can also vote for a person in specific. Those votes are being counted later on. So in the second counting, then the individual on the personal votes get counted. Every part of this is being reported. This is an official report which needs to be signed off by the head of the election committee in the town the election has been. This is, by the way, also the same for the local country voting, but also for European votes in Europe. So the process is still the same. Those ballots and the voting passes are stored with the reports for a period of 3 months. Then it has to be made sure that the outcome is official, it's being accepted, and the new people have been placed in office. After that 3-month date, so in our case, it means on April 1st, I got installed in City Council. So April 1st, May 1st, June 1st, July 1st, then they can send out the ballots to be destroyed. For this, an official sign-off by the official of justice has to be done. Then the process of destroying starts. It's a secure transport. It needs to make sure that the packages are still closed as sealed as they were. And it's also formalized in a process and an official report. And again, it needs to be signed off by the officer of justice. And I think this whole process is actually really secure. And I always knew that it felt safe to be voting. Right. But when I was reading them, I was like, hey, this is well done. And you cannot trace back. You can only trace back to which polling station I went, but you can never trace it back to what vote I had. And I think that is a big difference, because if you scan in your vote, then you know who has been voting for what. Right. And then you could be at risk of abuse of data, and especially in times like these with hackers. Even if it's not on purpose, it can still happen.
And that's the thing. You go to an electronic system, okay, and say, for instance, there are 1,000 levers to pull. Well, you can write a program, you can create a bot to pull those 1,000 levers. I mean, I do feel like it is infinitely more possible with technology or with AI to spoof your identity, to be able to manipulate more votes than one, to be able to like hack into the results, replace them with other results. I mean, there was an election in Mexico, I think in the 1980s, where literally it happened where some member of Congress messed around with the results on his spreadsheet and then published falsified results for the national election based on what he had done on his spreadsheet. So, I mean, I think electronically does open the possibility for that. And I think until we get to a point where we do have that sort of trust in our systems, I think paper is fundamental.
Yeah, and also the whole process around it. I mean, if it's sealed off and a seal is broken, you can see that the seal is broken. And I think that is one of the interesting things, because yes, we know that electronic seals are also there, but we also know that it is possible to interfere with that. And especially in times with AI, because if we look at all the opportunities that are increasing now with AI to manipulate stuff, it's really worrying. And that's, I think, a good thing. And going deeper on that, because we keep our ballots for 3 months, I dove deeper into the differences in Europe. And what the interesting part is that in some countries like Austria, France, and Sweden, we see that the ballots and the voting passes are destroyed as soon as formal approval is given. Right. And if we look at the longest period of keeping the ballots and the voting passes, is actually Italy and Poland. And that's 5 years. Because that was one of the things you were asking. How long would it be possible to trace back? In the Netherlands, 3 months after installation, it means the installation of the new city council or cabinet, or members of parliament, it means that the ballot needs to be destroyed. So you cannot after 2 years say, hey, you guys rigged the voting, because everything has to be destroyed
We have to
already.
move on. Yeah.
But that is also keeping secure, because all the reports were there, and we have to trust the system in this one. And I think that's an important one to realize, how important it is to trust the system itself. But for that, a system needs to be able to be checked and monitored. And I think there's where things go wrong, especially if you look at it from the different groups, and the polarization impact of far right saying, hey, people in the left government do things wrong, or people on the far left say,
Right.
hey, the right government is doing things wrong. And I think the whole trustworthy thing, it actually shows that in this case, if you talk about slop, it does happen in elections. And maybe this is one of those things where we need to figure that digital is not the solution, but we need to go back to the old fashioned paper way. It doesn't mean you cannot have the outcomes published and have reports made up
Right.
digitally, but it's about having the printed version that gives the proofs, get a package that is sealed, and make sure that everybody trusts the outcome.
I
Is
don't
that
think
weird?
I don't think I could sum it up any better than you did just now. So really that, we could have all the technology in the world, and really at the end of the day, when it comes to voting, you need some sort of physical, decentralized, source of information, and or source of truth. And that source of truth has to be not manipulated in any way.
But if you think about it, and think about, let's go back to where we started of filling in a poll. How do you say it again? Filling out a form
ballot?
on, say, no, not the ballot.
Voter registration.
No, no, Monday, really? Okay, no, filling out a form on a questionnaire on whatever reason.
Oh, a petition.
A petition, yeah.
There we
Thank
go.
you
Okay,
for the
back
good
up. All right.
word. Yay! So let's fill in a petition. Would you feel comfortable now having this whole discussion and say it's a petition, but you could fill in the petition if you would do it, and you could do it in a closed version or a public version? What would you choose with all the knowledge you have now on the research done in the Tucson case and on the information you found about what happens with candidates if information gets out?
Oh, after doing all the research on the Luis Tascón case and that list in Venezuela, I would think 3 times before signing a petition for something. It's like,
But
if I
isn't
know
it
the
throwing?
organizers, and if I were like in part of an inside group, like say signing an open letter of 800 professionals, that's one thing. But for me to sign a petition in front of a supermarket, hell no.
And that is weird, because those petitions are also part of democracy. Because
Yes.
if you have a public petition, you can bring something at the table because you need enough people to sign up for it. It's literally, in the Netherlands even, that if you have 40,000 signers for a
Right.
specific topic, it has to be discussed in Parliament. So that means that if you have enough people signing up, but for that, you need 40,000 people to sign. You can do that in a closed version. You can do that in an open version. That is up to you. But the people who check if it's correct, they are going to see your name, but it's not going to be published on the public list. I really think it's important to be able to do that and to trust the system. Equally, if I would be living in the US, I wouldn't be too sure to sign up for the same topic for the
Right.
simple reason that it can bite you as soon as you make something or you make a statement which people don't like. And being a female, and I hardly bring it up, but I think really one thing which has to be we have to be open about, there's not a lot of women going into politics these days, because if you're women, it's even worse.
It's brutal.
It's brutal, meaning that even the slightest thing you sign up for can be used against you, and that's worrying. So for now, I'm happy I'm living in the Netherlands. I'm not going to move. That is one thing. Equally, I also think, and that's one of the good things, I think if we keep trust in the system and trust in the people who manage the system, people will trust democracy. And I think if we take out small elements bit by bit, bending democracy in a way that it benefits your personal political goal, with a few of those your Jumanji Tower crashes over and it's bye-bye of democracy, actually bye-bye of trust in democracy.
Right.
And I think that's one of the crucial things that we find, that digitalization has a downside in this one. All the things we learn, data has a downside because it can be used against you. Even when we also know all the benefits data can bring.
Right.
So maybe for the sake of democracy, every country needs to move back to paper ballots and paper voting passes, because of the simple reason that you can check and it feels safe, and you need to have a system which you can trust.
Yeah. And there's that side of it. And some way or another, I mean, we have to be able to combat the misinformation that's being put out there. Yeah. You know, I could walk into a perfectly trustworthy polling booth, and I've had this happen to me here in Florida, where I'm walking out and some lady's walking by with me is like, I don't know why I even voted, because they're just going to take this and manipulate this anyway, and God knows what they're going to do to this afterwards. Well, maybe we need to be a little bit more transparent and educate people on what happens to the ballots after we're done.
No, and that's one of the key reasons why I really wanted to do this episode, because we dove into what happens. And for me, it really brought that I'm really happy with the system we have. And I think that that's one of the crucial things that actually supports my idea of, hey, stepping back into local politics in this time, and say, okay, I really want to do something and want to make a difference, because more people need to step in and make a difference. But for that, you also need a system you can trust. Right. Because we cannot keep democracy going without people who want to take a seat and want to be elected.
100%.
It is a whole complex system. And I think that is one of the things which is also underestimated in this whole discussion. Trusting democracy, trusting the people, trusting the system. And for that, we need to work together. And it doesn't matter what political color you have. I think it's about trusting each other. And that's going to be a hard one in current society, I think.
Yeah. This will be an interesting year on this side of the Atlantic.
But can we close off with a positive note on this one?
Well, what I'm actually seeing and from hearing from all of this is that the system we have here in the U.S., from what you're describing, isn't so hugely different. So it's not so much the voting system, it's not the mechanics of balloting. It's essentially the aura around it and the amount of mistrust that has been falsely placed on it is what I understand. And I think pretty much everyone is in agreement here, like that we should be sticking with paper and avoiding too much technology that centralizes or puts too many levers in one, or puts too much power behind one lever.
And I think, and also what I find positive is that if you learn about the system, it helps you to trust the system.
Yes.
And I think that is crucial to realize, that if you want to trust something, you also need to know how it works. So instead of providing disinformation, let's move to providing better information how elections work. And yes, open the system of when ballots are counted and have people watch from a public area and see what's happened. Because if we don't do that and then tell what happens, explain what happens and say, okay, these are the person wearing, for example, a white jacket. They do the counting. The people in the green jacket, they are the ones checking up. And if some things happen, the red jacket steps in and then whatever happens next. And I think all those elements being brought together, it can bring back trust in democracy as a whole. I mean, it is so important that we make sure that people know what's happening. And that's the basic of trust. If you don't know what's happening, how can you trust stuff? So let's inform people. I think that's a good one to close with.
Yep. Councillor Bianca, I think your town is very lucky to have you on the city council. They're very lucky to have you. So
let's ask them in 4 years.
and from this side of the Atlantic, hopefully, we can have something positive to say like that. So stay tuned. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for joining us. See you next time.